Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 8th of April 2019, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio today, Patrick Henningsen from 21st Century Wire. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Mike.
Well, Patrick, free speech is over in the UK, it seems, because what are we talking about? The complete shutdown. This apparently, according to the government, is the first online safety laws of their kind. And they're coming in this white paper. It's not law yet. There's a 12-week consultancy period, but this is what the British government is going to pursue. Now, the question is, what is an online harm? The white paper is called Online Harms. What is an online harm? Well, I'm going to cause one right now, because here's Theresa May.
Social media can be brilliant at connecting people across the world. But I'm deeply concerned that social media firms are still not doing enough to protect users from harmful content. And that's not good enough. So today, we're putting a legal duty of care on these companies to keep users safe. And if they fail to do so, tough punishments will be imposed. The era of social media firms regulating themselves is over. It's time to do things differently. It's time to keep our children safe.
So it's all about keeping our children safe, but as somebody in the chat box before we came on there said there, Patrick, this is Theresa May in full dictator mode. So let's have a look at what, because this is the question, what do they mean by online harm? In the white paper, there's no particular definition of it. They list some online harms, but they don't say what those are. So let's just run through these. A harm is child sexual exploitation and abuse online. Well, nobody can argue about that, but we might argue what the British government has done about it over the years. They say that this white paper is going to solve this problem. Well, let's continue on the list. The next harm is terrorist content online. That is to prevent terrorist content online. They're concerned about content which is illegally uploaded from prisons, because apparently they're unable to control the internet connections in prisons, and so prisoners are pushing content out online.
Does that mean that prisoners all have smartphones now?
Possibly.
So wouldn't that be an easy problem to fix, just by taking the smartphones away from the prisoners?
Well, that might be an easy problem.
Is that a violation of their rights?
No, it is an easy problem to fix. They're going to fix it by regulating the internet. It's not a problem.
From the government's point of view, yes, that's the solution.
Yes, okay, so let's move on. The next harm they list is the sale of opioids online, because regulation is going to stop that straight away. Cyberbullying is the next one.
And what constitutes cyberbullying? This is the big question. Is how arbitrary is this particular term?
Absolutely. Let's keep going. Self-harm and suicide, because regulating the internet is going to solve all the social problems that cause people to self-harm and to commit suicide. We're going to regulate the internet, and that's going to solve that overnight. Underage sharing of sexual imagery. Apparently, regulating the internet is going to solve that too. But now we come to it, because here is what it's really all about. Online disinformation.
Okay, here we go.
Online manipulation. Online abuse of public figures.
Criticism of public figures.
Criticism of public figures.
Right.
So those are the harms, well, let's see what kind of punishments they're talking about. They're talking about a statutory duty of care to make companies take more responsibility for the safety of their users. Now, this doesn't just apply to the big companies like Facebook, Google, and so on, and Twitter. This also applies to anybody that's running a blog, to anybody that's running a news website, anybody that's running forums, is accepting comments on articles and so on. They're going to require tech companies to ensure child abuse and terrorist content is not disseminated online. But it goes even further, because they're talking about extremist content, what they consider extreme content. And as David Cameron mentioned in his 2015 speech to the UN General Assembly, that includes anybody that's questioning the government narrative on issues such as 7/7 or 9/11 or vaccines or a whole range of different issues. They're going to create a regulator which is going to have the power to force social media platforms and others to publish annual transparency reports on the amount of harmful content on their platforms and what they're doing to address that. They're going to make companies respond to user complaints and act to address them quickly. They're going to create a code of practice issued by this new regulator, which could include measures such as requirements to minimize the spread of misleading and harmful disinformation with dedicated fact checkers, particularly during election periods. And they're going to create this new safety by design framework to help companies incorporate online safety features in new apps and platforms from the start. So this is all really great stuff. But look, we've got to put this in a little bit of context, Patrick, because we've got to put it in the context of Theresa May and her rapid response mechanism, because this is not about protecting children online. The government has done nothing to do that over the last couple of decades. This is not their major concern. Their major concern is the control of the narrative. So this was Theresa May at the G7 in 2016, talking about a new rapid response mechanism. This is all about all G7 countries agreeing a common narrative, and they all pursue that common narrative together. But not to be confused with the rapid response mechanism is the rapid response unit in the Cabinet Office, and this is a group of civil servants that now have permanent funding. They ran it as a pilot for a year, but recently it was given permanent funding, and these group of civil servants are just simply trawling social media and looking at who is pushing narratives which are contrary to the government narrative. Okay. On top of that, we've got disinformation programs running from the Foreign Office. This is the latest iteration. We've shown this graphic before, but it's being run via, at the end of the day, Mark Sedwill, who is head of the National Security Council, also head of the Civil Service, head of the Cabinet Office. And that, of course, leads us to programs like the Integrity Initiative. So, Patrick, we have a new string in the bow of what is a massive attack on free speech, on the ability to present a narrative which is contrary to the one which is given out by government. And okay, they can dress it up in the language of child abuse and in the language of prevention of sexualized images of young children online, but this is not the reason for it. The reason is their concern over the narrative.
If it was only about protecting the children, then what we would be reading in this white paper, Mike, would be specific to protecting children from indecent images and all abuse, pornography, and all of these sort of things that most people would agree are not good content for kids to be consuming. But that's not what's in here, Mike.
No.
This is a broad based agenda in here that's very arbitrary. The potential for abuse by the state here is tremendous, and it seems like a number of these things, Mike, when I'm looking down the list here, these are all things that potentially anything in opposition to government policy that could fall under the heading of, let's say, national security. Look at what they've done for the last couple of years. They've hyped up a fake, essentially what is a hoax, that Russia interfered in the U.S. 2016 elections. And on the back of that, they were able to sort of leverage that sort of fake talking point since 2016 to make the same accusations about Brexit, about other elections in Europe, that somehow our elections are under threat, when in fact they're not. There's been no proof to show that that's the case, but that features heavily in this document, Mike. And I have to ask, what is the real agenda going forward? Because what was it considered not extreme in 2012? Think about this. All of a sudden is now extreme in 2019. So what's going to be considered extreme in 2022? Do you see how the Overton window is shifting constantly, and the government looks like they're trying to position themselves to have the power and the ability to pounce on any alternative narratives, information, anything that might be embarrassing to the state, anything that might be bad for the state when it's trying to sell its policies. So that's clearly what it looks like this is.
There's nothing in this white paper about the online harms caused by the mainstream media. So let's just look at an absolutely appalling article here. This is from the Daily Record. Calls for probe into Scots-based Infowars after they apologised to Jeremy Corbyn. Now, it is fair enough that the Integrity Initiative has now apologised to Jeremy Corbyn, but that's not the issue that I want to raise from this article. because what you notice straight away from the headline is Scots-based InfoWars. Scots-based, is it really? Well, it begins by saying Labour MSP makes fresh call for probe into Fife-based Black Ops group, but it's not Fife-based.
It's not.
It's London-based.
It's London-based.
And in fact, the fact that they're using a Fife address as the registered address with the Scottish Charity Regulator and the registered address with Companies House, the fact that it's doing that is illegal.
So is this disinformation that we're reading here?
Absolute.
So it's meant to protect Jeremy Corbyn or redress his grievance, but it's actually showing a bit of disinformation.
It's full of disinformation, and it goes on to say leaders of the highly controversial Integrity Initiative, a registered Scottish charity, that's correct, said they had written to the Labour Party leader after personal attacks on Corbyn were retweeted on the unit's Twitter feed. The Fife-based group, so they repeated in the body of the text, the Fife-based group, which is publicly funded subsidiary of the Institute for Statecraft, apparently accused them of siding, of aiding Russia, probably unwittingly. But then they published this nice big image of Gateside Mills here, and the caption on the image is Gateside Mills in Fife, where the Integrity Initiative is based. It's not based in Gateside Mills in Fife, it's based in Temple in London.
And they know that because did they report on that, or was it?
Well, I don't know whether this
initially they had previously reported
I
on the story.
I believe that's true. The Scottish,
so they would know
that the Scottish Daily Record did report on that at the time.
So they're obfuscating the Integrity Initiative, covering up their true nature,
absolutely,
their true location.
Absolutely, and at no point in this article do they mention the fact that the Scottish Charity Regulator has an ongoing investigation into the fact that Integrity Initiative was using Gateside Mills, a derelict building, as their registered address.
I have to say, Mike, I'm glad they picked the good view of Gateside Mills there.
It's a carefully framed image, isn't it?
They didn't go around the back, did they?
No, they didn't. No, they didn't. But it doesn't end there, because you were rightly talking about Russian collusion in elections and so on. Well, let me introduce you to Madagascar. Now, for anybody who doesn't know where Madagascar is, there it is, the big arrow pointing to it. Well, the BBC have surpassed themselves, Patrick. They have absolutely surpassed themselves, because did Russia meddle in the Madagascar election? This is a big video report on the BBC News website. A BBC investigation has revealed that at least 6 candidates were offered money by Russians in the Madagascar elections. This is a massive geopolitical scoop that the BBC has picked up here, Pat.
Yeah, I wonder how much truth is actually in this report, Mike, because we've seen so many of these. Madagascar, of course, being coveted by all the great geopolitical powers. They don't have any oil. There's no trees left, but they have an opioid epidemic and lots of coffee, I'm told.
Right.
So I guess they're in Putin's crosshairs.
Absolutely, absolutely. So none of that and many other examples that we could have given from today's news are dealt with by the white paper into online harms. And in fact, the issue of mainstream media and the online harm that is, it's an online disaster, is not covered by the paper at all. So perhaps if there's 12 weeks of consultation on this, people might like to make some suggestions about how this white paper could be amended.
Yeah, I think the first thing you can do, Mike, is come up with a list of fake news items that have been published or produced, outright fabrications by The Guardian, by The Times, by The Telegraph, by the Daily Mail, and the list goes on, Al Jazeera, the BBC, CNN, etc. Put those in a list. I have done my own list on this, Mike, and I'm at about 120 at the moment. This is just in the last 24 months. These are major breaking stories that have been proved to be fake and fabrications. And you take that report and might as well sort of present that to the committee, I think, and ask them, what are they going to do about all these corporate media outlets that are pushing disinformation on a daily basis? So are they going to, did this factor into the calculus at all, the question?
So slightly related is the issue of Julian Assange. What is the latest on this?
Well, this was a big story over the weekend. Quite a few people are probably already aware of this, but there was a high-level source within the Ecuadorian government that had contacted WikiLeaks on Thursday evening to notify them that Julian Assange would be forcibly removed from the Ecuadorian embassy in London within, quote, hours and days. And of course, once this news broke, Mike, the Julian Assange sort of support community, which is global, really sprung into action. And there was people camped outside the embassy. A 24-hour live stream was set up. Press were arriving. Also armed police as well, Mike, were arriving. And so the concern was that if he was turfed out onto the street, Mike, then the British authorities would apprehend Julian Assange on the 2010 arrest warrant for jumping bail. That was bail to face a hearing regarding extradition to Sweden on rape charges that have a case that's since been dropped in Sweden, but the British bail jumping warrant still stands, apparently, we're told anyway. And then, of course, he would be rendered or extradited to the United States to face what anybody who has looked at this honestly could say is a kangaroo court, where he'd be tried under the 1917 Espionage Act, possibly a conspiracy to commit espionage with then Bradley Manning, now Chelsea Manning. So that was the fear, Mike, that he wouldn't receive due process in the United States. So Unity for J is the campaign that sprung into action here. And you can see their work on Facebook and on YouTube. They've run a 72-hour nonstop live stream with dozens of commentators, Mike, from around the world, journalists, academics, former government agent, operatives, intelligence analysts, politicians, all people who support this issue of Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. And why is this important, Mike? This is absolutely crucial, this issue, because what's at stake here is the whole concept of freedom of the press, the ability for a publisher to publish or a leaker to leak and then give to a publisher, be it a newspaper or WikiLeaks, to publish classified information in the public interest. So that's exactly what's under threat here. And this is what the current administration in the U.S. is trying to basically clamp down on, people believe. But this isn't just a Trump issue. This goes right back through to the Obama administration as well. So this is the big fear, Mike. And that leads us to an interesting story that cropped up over the weekend. What is media freedom? Well, it was a little bit of a celebration, Mike, led by none other than Jeremy Hunt, this is an article up on 21st Century Wire by Nina Cross. What's behind Jeremy Hunt's choice of Amal Clooney as the UK's new media freedom ambassador? So what is media freedom? This is a new initiative that's being championed by the British government. And of course, George Clooney's wife, human rights lawyer, she's the person who's been chosen to sort of front this campaign. But what's interesting, Mike, and what also comes up in Nina's article, is that Amal Clooney used to represent Julian Assange not just a few years ago. And Julian Assange is not mentioned, neither is WikiLeaks in any of the speeches or any of the press releases here for this weekend, as this major story is breaking, Mike. So Assange and WikiLeaks have been airbrushed out of the picture in terms of this conversation about media freedom. You can't get a more stark example of complete ignorance or just total obfuscation on the part of the state and this new so-called ambassador for media freedom. So we're meant to believe, Mike, that the press are under threat, but it's in third world countries. It's in places like Myanmar and Syria and Venezuela and Russia. Ching, ching, any hints going on here? No problems with press freedom in the West. It's not anything we need to focus on. It's all about the poor people in the developing world. We need to protect them from their evil dictators.
Well, so this is the narrative, whereas in reality they are absolutely focusing on press freedom in the sense that they want to shut down any competition against the utterly controlled mainstream press in the UK. And just to close this section off then, as I said at the beginning, this business will affect not just the big social media companies, it'll affect the likes of us, it'll affect individual bloggers, anybody with comments. And the threat is that this legislation will cause Google to remove people from search engine results. They're
Which
fine.
they've done already.
They're doing that already, but
Yeah.
but this will be given the force of law then, so that's an extra dimension to that. Or they will be censored by the internet service providers. Now, we've already got this in the UK. Many people don't know this, but in the UK we have a firewall amongst not so many. Some of the small internet service providers aren't part of it, but the likes of BT or Sky, TalkTalk, these types of scale of internet service providers already block certain websites, particularly file sharing websites and so on. But now we're going to create a list of people that are doing online harms. So the government, I recommend this article if people want to understand the hypocrisy of the UK government by pursuing this media freedom meme on one hand, and on the other hand, absolutely shutting down freedom of speech in this country.
And doing it very quietly and in a stealth way.
Yes.
In a sort of technocratic way.
Yeah.
So that's what we're seeing right now.
Well, look, we will be talking a bit more about this on the Extra Time segment, and of course that's available to supporters of the UK column and supporters of 21 Wire. So if you want to support the UK column, you can do that at ukcolumn.org/community. Join us there, and you will get access to the Extra Time segment of the UK column news. And also, if you want to support via 21st Century Wire, you can do that at 21wire.tv. Okay, now, good news, Patrick, good news. The Mirror, the Sunday Mirror, managed to get Charlie Rowley a visit to the Russian ambassador's residence, to the Russian embassy. So the headline on the Mirror here, this is an exclusive to the Mirror. Novichok victim Charlie Rowley asks Putin man, did you kill my girlfriend? Now, for those that don't remember, Charlie Rowley was one of the two civilians, in inverted commas, that were allegedly poisoned by Novichok subsequent to the Skripal poisoning. So what's the Mirror saying? They arranged for Charlie Rowley to visit the Russian embassy. They say, poisoned Charlie Rowley was yesterday told by Vladimir Putin's man in London that Russia wasn't behind the Novichok attacks in Salisbury because people survived. People survived, Patrick, and therefore it couldn't have been the Russians, is how the Mirror is spinning this. Charlie said Ambassador Alexander Yakovenko told him Russian Novichok would have killed everyone. Now, Charlie Rowley says that, of course, it killed his girlfriend, but he says that he washed his hands.
He had it all over his hands, but it didn't kill him.
Well, but the Russians' position is that Novichok is a lethal nerve agent. That's our position as well. Mm-hmm. It's a lethal nerve agent, and basically, if it had been Novichok was the cause of this, anybody that touched it would have died. Now, of course, that goes against UK government advice because the Chief Medical Officer, Dame Sally Davies, said at the time, my advice for any individual is to wash your clothes, wipe down any personal items, shoes and bags with cleansing or baby wipes before disposing of them in the usual way. So there's a definite disparity here between the British government's position and the Russians' position, and I think anybody with any common sense's position that a nerve agent such as Novichok could not be dealt with baby wipes.
Baby wipes.
But anyway, Charlie Rowley, he was given some history in the embassy and so on, well, he had this to say at the end of it. The ambassador kept saying the substance definitely wasn't the Novichok they had made because it would have killed everyone. He said, I liked the ambassador, but thought some of what he said, trying to justify Russia not being responsible, was ridiculous. The ambassador kept saying the substance definitely wasn't Novichok. And he said Russia only have small amounts of Novichok because they use it as an antidote and don't produce it anymore. He said the only countries that produce it now are the Czech Republic and America. I asked if he really thought Britain had carried out the attack. He said he didn't know because the British government wouldn't tell him anything. But America is the only place he thinks Novichok could have come from. He said Porton Down have it as well. So that's what happened there. The Russians tweeted out some nice images of them sitting having tea and so on, having some photographs taken.
A little history lesson there.
A bit of a history lesson. But this, of course, is the issue. Salisbury, unanswered questions. A couple of reports for Charlie and his brother who went with him, with a whole host of questions. And the list of questions that the Russians have is on the Russian embassy website. But I have one question which still hasn't been answered, Patrick, and that is, where are the Skripals?
Well, this is the big question, Mike. Missing persons, APB, All Points Bulletin. Where are the Skripals? Has anybody seen them? Are they alive? Why isn't Yulia Skripal allowed to return to Russia? And why not Sergei Skripal as well, for that matter?
Yeah.
I don't know. No one's had any access to them. You just have to take the media's word, and they're getting their sort of statement directly piped in from the government, saying that what is the latest anyway on Sergei Skripal? That he's in witness protection program?
We don't know.
I heard something to that effect. They possibly overseas even. They might even be in Canada by now under an assumed identity or something like that. So very strange, Mike. Very strange.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to Libya, Patrick.
Well, Libya is back in the news. So just when you thought things had stabilized in the Middle East, this is in North Africa. It's heating up in the Maghreb. You'll see a number of stories like this, calling it a crisis, calling it a civil war. What's happening now is there are forces led by the 75-year-old Khalifa Haftar that are now converging on Tripoli, Mike. We don't have a Libyan map for you today, but you can go ahead and look it up. This is an east versus west, essentially battle within Libya. And Haftar's forces are basically looking to supplant the UN-backed government. There's been a UN-approved government that's been installed in Tripoli since 2016. This is also an EU-backed government as well. So this is like the international community's administrative government of choice that has been in control of what has essentially been a failed state, Mike.
Since we blew it to bits?
Since we blew it to bits, since NATO flattened and dismembered Libya back in 2011.
Now, when you say NATO, who did the actual bombing? Britain and France, is that right?
Well, Britain, France, and Norway did. Norway did an incredible amount of sorties. That's the most practice in terms of bombing and killing Norway's ever had. So there was a few people that were allowed to get their hands dirty, let's say, in that operation. But so a failed state basically in Libya. And I might add also, Mike, there was a UN Security Council resolution which was they tried led by the U.S. and led by the European countries, they tried to push through to basically sanction Haftar, this warlord, okay, coming from Benghazi. And it was blocked by Russia, of course. It got the veto. So
is he Russian backed then?
No, well, that's the way that the narrative's going. They're going to try to frame Haftar as being backed by the Russians. The reason Russia had issued a veto on this UN Security Council resolution is because they didn't believe that it was right for the European countries to intervene again in Libya.
Right.
And mind you, this is the same Russia that abstained from the UN vote back in 2011 for resolution 1973, I believe, which was the no-fly zone. That's when Medvedev was president, okay?
Right.
So understandable. So this is actually getting really interesting here, because you asked who's backing Haftar, Mike. Not the Russians, okay? France has been a little bit on the fence, and there are accusations that France has some colonial designs in Libya, and is kind of possibly has some interests that are diverging with Brussels in the United States here. And I don't know if where Italy stands either, but I also think that Italy, there are some potentially things that could benefit Italy with regards to a new government or an overthrow, a regime change right now in Tripoli. So we're not sure, but definitely France seems to be playing it on the margins, Mike. And so the UK is kind of putting a little bit of diplomatic pressure on the French, saying what's going on. But hey, the good news is oil is up because of the tensions, so that's always good. Even though there's no real big threat to the global supply of oil, the markets have seen this as an excuse, or the black box trading bots have seen this as an excuse to sort of jack up the price of oil temporarily anyway. But, you know, in terms of the potential of Libya, yes, there's $80 billion, Mike, of oil revenue and foreign currency reserves And so who gets control of that? Is that going to be a UN, EU-backed administration in Libya, or is it going to be the government which would come into power, a national unity government that comes in after Khalifa Haftar? And who's lingering in the background of all this, Mike? The son of Muammar Gaddafi, Saif al-Islam, is lingering in the background. And guess what? He does have a fairly broad-based support network. And so if he ran for president, if there were elections, if there was a civil war right now and things ended and then there were new elections, he would be a viable candidate for president of Libya. And you have to think about the implications of that. So, what kind of president would he be? Would he be pro-Western or not? This would be a big question. So this is getting very interesting in Libya, and also ISIS, Mike, has also reared their ugly head and will probably continue to do so. Certainly that would give the U.S. an excuse to sort of redeploy, because they did pull their troops out this week. They said it's not safe for U.S. troops in Libya. That's interesting. So maybe they're just reorganizing their position, as it were, to intervene again in the future. So keep all your eyes on Libya, and we'll try to keep an eye on that story as well.
Okay, and what about Israel then? Elections going on?
Well, this is where the real action is right now. Yes, I believe April 9th for the polls. That would be like tomorrow, or yes, tomorrow, right? Yes. So yeah, Israeli elections are coming up. This is huge, Mike. This is huge because it's not just Israeli elections that are at stake here. It's not just the political survival of Benjamin Netanyahu. This is about the political survival as well of Donald Trump, and more specifically, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who's cooking up the deal of the century, okay? So what's happening in the run-up to this election? Let's have a look. Now, I would be a little bit worried, Mike, because a lot of stuff has been going on in the last couple of months with Netanyahu. He's up for corruption charges. He might just win out on this, or this might be pushed onto the other side of the election if he wins. If he can tough it out, what's he done? He has declared the Israeli ownership of the Golan Heights, of Syria's Golan Heights, against all UN resolutions, international law. He's passed the Israeli ethno-national laws that basically are creating Arabs as second-class citizens. They've already moved the embassy in Jerusalem. But just in the last couple of weeks, Mike, to pander to the far right coalition that he's stitched together, he's gone for land grabs in the Golan, and now, look, the West Bank, annexing the West Bank. So he's crossed that red line now. This is how desperate Benjamin Netanyahu is to stay in power. What else? Well, the reaction from the rest of the Arab world in the Middle East, Turkey being a major player in the Middle East, they've said absolutely no, the West Bank belongs to the Palestinians. So again, and this is going to create more splits between NATO and Turkey, and of course the Trump administration and Turkey. They're already on the rocks over the S-400 orders versus the F-35 orders, so the military contracting wars there. This is only going to create more fissures politically here. So let's look at how this is going to feed into the next part of the story, Mike. So we have to look at this in the context as well of the U.S. political system, okay? So what's happening in terms of the U.S. election right now? You have Trump, who's got all of his chips stacked on Benjamin Netanyahu. Basically, the whole Donald Trump Middle East agenda is really predicated on his close relationship between himself, Benjamin Netanyahu, and also Jared Kushner and Netanyahu, okay? So whatever Netanyahu wants, he gets from the United States. Netanyahu is also campaigning on that. In Israel, he's saying, I'm so tight with the Trump administration, I've delivered you the embassy in Jerusalem, I've delivered you the Golan Heights, I'm going to deliver you the West Bank. So the hard right, the ethno-nationalist, really extreme National Front Jewish organizations that he's allied with to try to get a coalition together to win this election, okay? They love this, okay? So he's pandering to that common denominator, which is the far right in Israel. So how is this affecting the U.S. political system? Let's take a look. Let's take a look at this. The 2020 elections. Let's look at the Democratic side, Mike. And what's going on the Democratic side? Well, it's about Beto's balls. So Beto's balls, and we're not talking about, we're talking about the Zen balls, Mike. So the Zen of Beto O'Rourke. And let's look at what Beto said here. Let's take a look at that. Okay, Beto O'Rourke basically saying that the U.S.-Israeli relationship, if it's to be successful, must transcend partisanship in the United States and must transcend a prime minister who's racist. He's come out of the gates, Mike, this week and called Benjamin Netanyahu a racist.
That's a brave thing to do in the United States.
That's a ballsy thing to do. Hence, the name of the segment is Beto's Balls. So that's a brave thing to do, absolutely. There's going to be a potential backlash for O'Rourke. He is making a major calculated move here, basically, because, and we'll explain why in a minute, but this is a ballsy move. Or is it, Mike? Or is this a ballsy move? Because Beto O'Rourke has received a lot of money from the Israeli lobby over the years. So the question is this portending another outcome for the Israeli election? Maybe an upset? Maybe Netanyahu's out? But I don't think so, because I see other far-right candidates vying for power in Israel too. So let's take a look at what he said. He said the U.S. relationship is one of the most important relationships that we have on the planet, and that relationship, if it's to be successful, must transcend partisanship in the United States, and it must be able to transcend a prime minister, he's talking about Netanyahu, who is racist, okay, as he warns against Arabs coming to the polls. So O'Rourke is not wrong there, Mike. He's not wrong. So what is he doing? Let's take a look at what he says after this. Who wants to defy any prospect for peace as he threatens, he's talking about Netanyahu again, to annex the West Bank, and who has sided with a far-right racist party. He's talking about the Otzma Yehudite party, the far-right Israeli front. So in order to maintain his hold on power, these are all the things that we outlined earlier, Mike. So, but he's not finished. He says we must be able to transcend Netanyahu's current leadership to make sure that our alliance is strong and that we will continue to push and settle for nothing less than, here we go, a two-state solution. So now it's revealed, because that is the best opportunity for peace for the people of Israel and the people of Palestine, Mike. So I'm not exactly sure what to make of this, because according to any analyst that you talk to right now, the two-state solution, Mike, is dead. It's DOA, it's dead on arrival, it's long gone, okay, but somehow it still has a hold in the U.S. conversation.
But it's something which is brought up every once in a while in order to defuse any argument over Israel-Palestine. Oh, well, we've got this two-state solution. This is what we're going for. We can criticize Israel all we like because we're aiming for the two-state solution. Actually, Israel doesn't mind the criticism too much, so long as it's put in the context of the two-state solution, and they just get on doing what they're doing.
So that's what a lot of people think, that Beto is hedging his bets here. So he hasn't really upset the Israeli lobby as long as he keeps pushing the two-state solution, which is going nowhere, basically. It's a total lemon, basically. So that's what a lot of people are saying. So now, but you also have to look at this. Now let's look at this in the context of Donald Trump and Jared Kushner. Trump and Kushner were supposed to release what they call the deal of the century, okay? They've been pushing it back. It's been over a year now. This was supposed to be unveiled. This was the great deal of the century being masterminded by the wonderkind Jared Kushner, the son-in-law, the president-in-law of the United States, okay? So, and here they are, Mike, and there's Kushner in the background, looking very much like Damien, an older Damien, but there's Trump and Netanyahu. So this is all about Netanyahu. So they pushed the plan back now to after the Israeli elections. So O'Rourke is using this, I believe. He has kind of an idea of what's in the Kushner deal. So he's already positioning himself to win some of the sort of the millennial support. You realize there's a pro-BDS voting bloc out there. He wants to capture these votes, these centrist Democrat votes. These are sort of more pro-Palestinian than the Hillary crowd, basically. Right. Younger people. So But what is the deal of the century, Mike? It's probably more like this. This is sort of a dud 80s film starring Chevy Chase. This is more like, I think, the deal that's coming, okay? The deal of the century is going to be like a bad DVD from the 80s. And I'll explain to you why. People say, how can you say that? You haven't seen the deal yet. And my answer is this, Mike. We don't need to see the deal because the deal's already done. The deal has already been unrolled over the last 12 months. The U.S. moving its embassy to Jerusalem, the U.S. recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital, the U.S. calls for Israel's annexation of Syria's Golan Heights, and Israel announces annexation of Palestine's West Bank. So that's the deal of the century, okay? It's already done. So they've been so clever to sort of push this down the road, and then meanwhile getting all of the hardline objectives that they've wanted over this period. So the deal of the century, my friends, is going to be a bad deal for the Palestinians. I can't imagine what's going to be unveiled by the great Jared Kushner that's going to sort of undo all the bad will and lost ground and land and everything and rights and so forth by the Palestinians. This seems to me one of the biggest scams ever. So I'm getting ahead of the story a little bit, but I'm just guessing this is going to be a massive dud. So
Okay.
If it's ever revealed, I'm waiting. Could be next week, could be next year, could be after the 2020 elections. I don't know.
Okay, interesting. Well, look, let's end on Brexit today, well, we're going to commit another internet harm now, so I will warn everybody of that straight away.
Over the last few days, people have been asking me what on earth's happening with Brexit. And I can understand that because, after all, it's nearly 3 years since people voted in the referendum for the UK to leave the European Union. Well, where we're at is that the government negotiated a deal with the EU, and my preference was for that deal to be passed by Parliament, and we could leave with the EU on that basis. But Parliament's now rejected that deal 3 times, and right now, as things stand, I can't see them accepting it. But at the same time, Parliament has also said that they don't want us to leave without a deal, with no deal. Indeed, this very week, Parliament's been legislating to block no deal. So the choice that lies ahead of us is either leaving the European Union with a deal or not leaving at all. Now, I think, the government thinks, we absolutely must leave the European Union. We must deliver Brexit. That means we need to get a deal over the line. And that's why we've been looking for new ways, a new approach to find an agreement in Parliament. And that means cross-party talks. And when you...
Okay, so Pat, she went on to, first of all, this is Theresa May at the weekend, attempting to be much more conversational, speaking to the nation.
I like the shaky cam too.
Yeah, exactly.
That was so authentic.
Right.
It was so edgy.
Right.
She's so down with the kids right now.
You're absolutely bang on, right? This is exactly what she was aiming to do here. But what's she talking about? She's talking about security. She's talking about cross-party. You were talking about a government for national unity in Libya. This is what's forming in the United Kingdom at the moment, because what she went on to talk about there was the point that Brexit is a cross-party issue. This is not a party political issue, it's a cross-party issue. And we've all got to come together and deal with these issues in a cross-party manner. This is the European model of governance. You look at Italy, for example. Germany, where you've got coalitions, cross-party coalitions. This is the future model of government.
Of course, it can go horribly wrong too. The coalitions, as we know.
I think Brexit is demonstrating how horribly wrong it can go. But you know, once again, Patrick, security absolutely at the top of her list. So let's just remind ourselves what she means by security when she's talking about that. Of course, she means defence. Because amongst other things, it's civilian law enforcement. This is government policy. It includes defence and includes things like cyber health. It's all-encompassing term, but it absolutely includes defence. So I thought it was quite interesting that Chatham House last week pushed out this document: to preserve NATO, Britain must help reinvent it. And this is a fantastic document here. This is written by Hans Kudnani, who's a senior research fellow at Chatham House. He said, it often seems to be completely forgotten that NATO, which celebrates its 70th anniversary on the 4th of April, was a British initiative. Specifically, the idea came from Ernest Bevin, the Foreign Secretary in the radical Labour government of Clement Attlee. He said that Bevin had given a speech to the House of Commons in January 1948 in which he called for a Western Union. Well, of course, the Western Union that he had in mind wasn't NATO, an embryonic NATO at all. It was an embryonic EU defence union. And if you want to know a bit more of the history of that, then have a look at this article that I wrote on the UK Column website, Military Union, British Government Policy since 1948, and we show the documents that were written at the time, which formed the five-part treaty, which eventually became the Western Union. The Western Union became the Western European Union, which was a defence arrangement at European level. NATO was a parallel initiative, which came out of the same type of thinking, perhaps. But anyway, getting back to the Chatham House article here, he goes on to say that over the next 14 months, Bevin turned his vision into reality, a series of carefully calibrated steps. Though, of course, crucial element was the US security guarantee to Europe. It's doubtful whether it could have happened without Bevin's creativity and tenacity. He says that Britain once again needs to think as creatively as Bevin did about how it can shape European security. Security, remember, includes defence. And he goes on to say, it seems pretty clear that the only way the US security guarantee to Europe might be made sustainable in the long term is for Europeans to make a greater contribution to their own security. And as we've pointed out many times in this programme, Patrick, that really began with Donald Trump's inauguration speech at the opening of the new NATO headquarters in Brussels, when he absolutely said that the Europeans have to step up and pay more, or else the US would not guarantee to support their security anymore. But the author ends by saying this: the UK is the only power that can take the lead in such a rebalanced NATO. Now, as the point that we've made many times, Pat, is that of course when they're talking about a rebalanced NATO, what they're talking about is bigger defence spending at the European level. This is all about European Defence Union within NATO, and the UK saying that European Defence Union fits within NATO, it's not going to duplicate structures and so on. Ursula von der Leyen, the German defence minister, saying the same thing, and others, Mogherini and others, saying the same thing. It's very important that whatever structure ends up being, and it's pretty clear what that structure is going to be now with the 7 pillars of the European Defence Union, bilateral defence agreements on one end between countries, NATO on the other end, and all the various pillars of NATO Defence Union in between, including PESCO and CARD and all the other acronyms that they have. It's absolutely clear, and he is suggesting that the UK is the only power that can take the lead in such a rebalanced NATO. He is saying no matter what, the UK has to be part of European Defence Union structures. And that is the message from Chatham House. All the evidence that we have, Pat, as you know, is that that's exactly what is happening. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, look, we are going to leave it there for today. We're a little bit over time. Thank you very much for joining us today, Patrick. Thank you for joining us. We will be back at the same time, 1 p.m. as usual on Wednesday. We will see you then. Bye-bye.